Hi everyone, welcome to a data privacy webinar. It's on the topic of really about journey to sustainment, and it's a three-part series. So what I'll do is, this is the second part. So the first part was 2 weeks ago, was really on data discovery and looking at some of the challenges around data discovery and the solutions. If you missed that particular session, it was recorded. And after the three-part series, you will receive a link so that you can watch that in your own time. For today's one, we're looking at around the challenges around the data cleanups and around the data privacy. And I just want to welcome, we've got a guest speaker, and his name is David Messmann, and I'll just give you a bit of background. And then in 2 weeks' time, we're looking at really around sustainable data frameworks. And we've got Rob Tyler who'll be speaking on that particular topic. So what I want to do is, if you have any questions throughout, so what we've set aside is about 20 to 25 minutes of discussion and interview with David. And then we wanted to set aside some time for questions. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to enter into the Zoom checkbox, and we'll answer that towards the end. If we get a number of different questions, we might finish a little bit earlier, and so that way we can address some of those ones, but we'll gauge it at that point. So what I might do is I'll just stop the sharing, and hopefully you can see David as well. And I'll just do a brief introduction of David, and just give me 1 second while I switch these screens, and then we'll make a start. So, okay. So just a bit about David before we begin. So David was born in Canada, and he moved over he did a university exchange to Melbourne, and he saw the light, better weather in Australia, no more snow, and better beaches and everything. Then he went back to Canada to finish his bar in Ontario. Then he migrated to Sydney. So he missed Sydney too much. He missed Australia, the weather, the beaches, the outdoor. And then he came over. He's been working closely with the New South Wales government and really helping to develop, specialisation in information access regimes, privacy law, privacy matter and data governance for the past 15 years. So a real expert in that field. He's also an international associate of privacy professionals, a fellow of the Information Privacy and Knowledge Networking Chair of IAPP Sydney. And he also does screen and speech writing on the side. So it's kind of cool from a lawyer to doing that kind of extra curriculum. So I just want to welcome you, David.
Thanks, Richard. You can hear me all right, can you? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you fine. Okay, right. So get into it in terms of some of the questions. So this is more of a Q&A, and just to make it a bit more interesting for the audience. So nearly every day we hear about data breaches, and recently there's been quite a lot of big ones in Australia, especially in health, telco, and now in finance just recently. And as a consumer, I always ask these questions, what are the ways these organizations really protect our data? And an example is that late last year, one of my credit cards was compromised, and I haven't used it for a long time. And considering it was linked to one of the breached organizations, and data was stolen and people started putting bills on it. And the question is, when data is stolen, who takes accountability? And so with that in mind, I just wanted to open with, it really would be interesting to get your thoughts on some of the latest high profile data breaches, just coming from your perspective, the legal angle. Over to you.
I've been hit with that a couple of times, and ironically enough, yesterday, we went through this whole rigmarole of having to redo our credit cards. And it's not pleasant for anybody. And as far as the question itself, who takes accountability? I actually wrote an article for the IAPP, just sort of mooting the fact that maybe we should actually have a statutory regime that's effectively an insurance payout for people who are hit with just the basics, like having to re-up their passports, driver's license, Medicare cards, and stuff like that, just to take some of the sting out, because it seems to be, if this were a movie franchise, data breaches would be definitely the Fast and Furious, because it seems to be happening endlessly. So in terms of responsibility, I think realistically, I don't know who can actually find a way forward, but I think what the biggest lesson from an Australian perspective has to do with Optus, which if you've read about that, the issue with Optus, from my understanding, is that there was effectively a backdoor left open via an API. Someone had to have known about it, obviously, and it was that weakness that was exploited. But the difficulty is for Optus, they had reams and reams of old data, some going back like 10, 12 years and so forth. And I think the biggest takeaway for all these things is that businesses are now on notice in terms of their responsibility, just to ask the basic questions like, do I actually need this? Is there another way that I can actually get the data? Maybe it's from another source to prove it, like calling up a bank, or actually having a regime that actually sets up like a Willy Wonka golden ticket for your ID, which is being mooted right now in Australia. And the other big thing is you just have to say, right, this data, we just need it for this purpose, which is to open the account. And after that, just chuck it away or put it into the deep storage. Or if there's an interim period, encrypt it. And then make sure you do a regular following up on the data lifecycle, figuring out, yep, we had it for the onboarding of that client. Don't need any more, dump it. And that's it. And I think that's the big takeaway these days, is less is a lot more, because there was a lot of hype around data being like the new oil and this asset and so forth. And I think people are realizing that, big data is a little bit like, if it's an oil, it's a greenhouse gas producing hydrocarbon, which is causing damage to the environment.
Yeah, no, that's very good. But the only question is, really around businesses always say that they have to, you have to have a business requirement, but most businesses say that they need to have it and they don't know why, but they'll say, yes, because we want to, maybe if you're used to be a customer of an organization, we can send that through again. So, and then.
Well,
yep.
Sorry. If you're saying like put it back onto the client to push back, because I think that's a really great idea, to be honest, because if we empower people to say, what the heck do you need this for? You can get it from another source, or it's not necessary. It basically stops it's a lazy, just, we've got it, therefore we need more. Question the entity as well. But I think staff have a big role to play in that issue as well, because if you think about privacy by design concepts, if you were to put it down, there's 7 principles or 7 key principles, but I think the biggest one is just not the biggest one, but in my opinion, it really has to do with having an inquisitive mind and saying, if we're going to start this process, what's the end point? What's the ugly bit at the end? What do we need this stuff for? And if everybody's actually thinking, right, what are the consequences as you collect more and more data? Those question marks, I'm putting myself in the role of the client. Do they need that? Do we need that? For what purpose? If there's no real purpose, just don't do it. And you have to empower your staff to ask those questions as well at each stage in the process. And my own personal take on things is we're seeing a really big shift between privacy that's led by people like me, lawyers, who have, we think of things in terms of administrative law principles, versus tech people who actually will design systems that will keep basically cyber thieves or, threat actors just away. And I think that role is actually going to increase in importance as we move along, because lawyers just think about in terms of what's the consequences, what are my fines and so forth. They don't think about building the system. And I think we need more people who know how to build systems that are safe. And I think that's where privacy is going, actually.
Okay, that's a good point. That leads on to my second question. So do you think that protecting brand and reputation has surpassed the legal obligations as a primary driver for data protection? Take, for example, recently with Latitude Finance in Australia, the recent breach on driver's license and credit card. And I don't think it was a legal obligation that was driving how they protected data. I think the more impact for them now is their brand and reputation. If you look recently, there's been a 13% share price drop, and I think that's probably more the main reason why they should do that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm of two minds on that front, to be entirely honest. I think it's a short-term loss, and then people forget. People probably don't even remember that there was a Telstra breach a few years back, and there was a blip, and then it came back up again. And it's been relatively consistent. I think what actually drives change is not reputation of the company, but I think it's reputation of boards and management, like the executive team. Because if you were one of the board members or one of the key executives under your watch, you got hit with a data breach, that's going to go with you. And that's going to be a huge lesson learned. And not even so much about the fines, because the fines, to my mind, are just the very much the tip of the iceberg, because the big costs come from, I mean, like you said, Richard, you have a dip in your reputation, therefore people don't want to work with you. They're not going to buy your shares, they're not going to buy your products. But I think even more so, it's the remediation costs that, you're going to be subject of regulator scrutiny. They're going to come in and say, right, you did this poorly. You actually have to fix your systems or even start from scratch. And then, that's probably the biggest mess in terms of how you're actually going to manage your business, like cost-wise. They're a lot bigger than the fines. And I think what drives that is the people inside your business who are in positions of authority. They're going to have that individual, they'll have the memory of, right, I got hit with a data breach, and it really badly impacted my reputation. And that will move. I think that'll be the driver as opposed to the corporate reputation, because frankly, the share market has, the memory span of a what's the term, a gadfly, I guess. So
yeah, so true. Yeah.
Just, if I could jump in for 1 second, and I didn't say this beforehand. I work for NBN, which is the National Broadband Network, and I just wanted to say that I'm speaking today. In no way does that reflect my opinions as an employee of the NBN. I'm here as an individual, and more so as like a member of the IAPP, pardon me, and someone who's actually interested in this field. So please don't take this whatsoever as any indication or any comment on, say, Optus or Telstra or any other company, because there are suppliers and so forth. And it has nothing to do with my position in NBN. I just want to make that very, very clear. It's my own personal opinion, and that's it. Okay, just to flag that to people.
No, that's fine. We just want to understand your personal opinion on these topics, and that's what everyone will want to hear and your experience. So I appreciate that. So do regulators need to revise their data retention mandate in the light of the recent breaches? One of the concepts is I worked in organizations, and this data retention laws is a bit vague. Sometimes we say, how long is too long? Do we need to hold it for financial reasons? Whether it's 7 years, is it 1 year, is it 2 years? And like we said before in that discussion, is that I was a previous customer of Optus, and how long do they need to hold my information for after I've already left the organization? And I think that I'm not sure whether there's, coming from a legal point, whether there's actually clarity in that space. And I think there's some confusion for most organizations, is that, and do you think they need to revise those kind of laws?
Here's the problem, though. Which laws? Because if you look at it, a good example is in Australia, most corporates will have to, and I just read this recently, they'll have to be up to speed. The board will have to be up to speed on, give or take, 240 different bits of legislation. And the problem is every one of those bits of legislation will have different record keeping requirements. Example, in the Commonwealth of your GB, like NBN, you're subject to the Archives Act, but you're also subject to any number of other acts like the Privacy Act. And the thing is, most lawyers would actually say to you, okay, if you can point to me of those 240 rules, which one applies to that bit of data? I mean, it's an impossible task. So, and it's also a rhetorical question. You actually say that because you don't want to be in the hot seat to say, oh yeah, it's okay to get rid of it, because you never know if you need it for an asbestos claim or litigation, or, to figure out what a claim is, or the list goes on, or do you need even for like a privacy regulatory investigation, right? So the easy thing is you hold on to everything, which has been the case. And probably people don't remember Enron, but the thing that got Enron was the fact that they kept absolutely everything, including emails that said, we should really get rid of this. That kind of thing, the smoking gun. So I think the answer is, you just can't, is the reality. It's because it's too complex. And I think what needs to happen going forward, and I think what your impulse that you're talking about is super important, in that we need to have a middle road, which actually has, the classic for privacy is you figure out, right, I'm subject to, the California Consumer Protection Act and the HIPAA Act in the US, yet I sell to the EU, and therefore I'm subject to the GDPR, but we also have clients we're dealing with in Australia. So you have like a ring around the rosy of different regulatory regimes. So what do you always do? You go to the highest, like the most strict rules. But the problem is a lot of them have different rules. So I think a sensible approach basically is, you have to figure out, lots of data is bad. Start getting rid of it. And that's why I think people will need to figure out, and this is an impossible task. Like you talk about doing data inventories. If you're talking about, bazillions of terabytes of data, it would be a full-time job for the rest of, time to search through all of that and categorize it. So I think simple things are, I think the UK ICO, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, they have a concept of put it beyond reach. And I think that's actually a very clever way to do it, because you just go, right, I need that to onboard that client, but I may need it to double check because of some regulatory requirement, like the cops might need it in the future to see who is at that address and so on. So what do is you basically put it somewhere, which gives access to maybe 2 or 3 admin people, and they only access it when 2 people, like, as if you're doing the nuclear launch, 2 people have to turn the keys to open it up, right? And then basically tokenize everything, because what happens if you're in the situation with Optus where there's a backdoor that's opened by an API and they get access to it and exfiltrate it? So I think you need to both encrypt it when you put it into the middle ground, lock the door, and then basically put it at the highest level where it's going to be. It's like, okay, I might need it for this reason. So most of them, like in Australia, it's like 7 years for the Corporations Act. Most stuff, it's going to be a consumer complaint, right? For like in the Optus situation. So keep it for a couple of years and then just get rid of it. But you'd have to rationalize at each step what you're going to do. And I think what's needed and this is a very long answer, and I apologize, but I think conceptually the regulators have to come up with basic standards where they follow the data process flow. If you got to hold it, you lock it up. And then you have you have my blessing to get rid of this stuff, basically. And then we're not going to go after you, because you don't want to have caught between the regulator who wants it ex post facto when you have a data breach, and then me as the lawyer goes, prove to me why we can get rid of it, right? So I think a better way is actually, again, going back to tin tax, as they say, have a person who's a techie who can figure out a way that they can follow the data flow at each stage, lock it up, and then just delete. Basically, it's like you need a storage works basically for your data, and lock it up.
That's very good. That was a part of some of my next question anyway around.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's okay. You answered that one, so that's good. Yeah, the only challenge you get is around what do you identify as data privacy, because the problem is information. If we lock up some information that's not really relevant, then we end up wasting and spending more on storage where we can destroy that. So I think that's some of the challenges.
Well, what's interesting is also a lot of companies you'll discover, usually you have to do an analysis of where you put data, and it's like, what the obvious things are. It's like HR holds people's records and they've got their tax file number or their criminal reference check and all that stuff. That's obvious, that's locked away. You never hear about hackers breaking into the HR groups, right? It's always like some backdoor into something. And I think, having read some of the literature, it suggests that, that's where they go, because hackers, they always want to have what's the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, it's a business model effectively. So where you go to customer record systems where people are on the telephone and they type up, oh, I see that your nickname is blah, and let's do and they type in details that then becomes a way to actually use your details for identity theft, right? So I mean, it's actually horrifyingly complex. And another issue is a lot of, long-term employees will, they use, I mean, I'm guilty of it as well. Like I've actually had to go in and scan, because I don't have a scanner at home. So I scan some form that I've got to send for my health fund or something like that. And then I send it, and then it's sitting on our photocopier, right? Or at least on the records until such time as it's gone. So if you think about those sort of things, and you need a tool that can go and scan over all your data assets, or as best you can, and then find stuff. And the really hard part is like, how do you point and shoot? Like, how do you go, right, I see that there's lots of tools on the market, and you know what they are. We're talking about them right now. But how do you segregate that stuff? How do you go, right, that's clearly a passport. It's a photo, like it's basically a JPEG, or it's a PDF or whatever. How do I actually lock that up? So dumb David with his health number, right?
Yeah.
How do you stop David from doing that, i.e. me? And the answer is, I think you need to figure out a way that you can have a code written, you find it, and then you basically chuck it into the temporary storage, then going to be encrypted. And then if someone squeals about the fact that, and I won't, because I'll be happy because I stupidly used work to scan my form to send, So, and there's a lot of stuff like that that you don't even think about. And people don't like, oh yeah. And it's like, but apparently everyone does it. I have discovered. So it's finding one of those tools, obviously, and segregating the stuff. And then my approach would be wait till people squeal because they've moved it. It's like, but I think they'll frankly be a lot happier because it's like, I mean, my own person, like I was just telling Richard, we've renovated, moved into our house, and it's not all finished, but we moved stuff to storage for like 9 months. And we said we were going to go and like sort through it and then throw it out because the local council tip and their recycling stuff is around the corner from where the storage was. Well, of course, what did we do? None of that. We brought it all back and put into the garage where there's space, right? Like, don't be me. A business should be smart and be able to go through the data life cycle, figure out what's there, what are the uglies, lock them up, put a key around it, and then we're done.
Yeah, anyway. that makes sense. I'm conscious of time. I'll just actually.
Oh, sorry, I'm babbling away.
Apologies. No, that's okay. It's fantastic. So I'll actually one more question. So for most of the people online, I think the challenge will be some of them are really starting off in their data privacy journey around PI data and then trying to get onto their feet. What are your thoughts on really where to start and how do you justify to business to spend on data privacy? What are your some tidbits on that?
Okay. I might give a little plug. I wrote an article for the IAPP. It's called Fines, Flossing, and Films. And there's a reference in there to basically being able to tell a good story. And the truth of the matter is that, we talk about in Australia how fines have now gone up to 50 mil and, you'll be subject to regular oversight and so forth. But the truth of the matter is that all those are numbers and they don't really make a difference. And they're soon to be forgotten as well. And I think the way to really pitch it is to make it personal. And you need to tell a story about a person and then make the idea of a data breach, not about, and if you look at the Ponemon, I think it is the Ponemon Institute, they actually do stats on how much each data breach in the US will cost. And something like it's between $11 and whatever per record. And that actually, to my mind, I mean, it's the work they do is great, and it's actually a really good start, and it's a great way to pitch, this is how much it's going to cost, because business is all about cost. But I disagree. It's not about cost. It's about people. And it's not a record. It's a person. And if you can actually say, look, it's going to cost all this money. Fines are just the tip of the iceberg. And basically all these other costs are associated with it. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is think about, we've got a client who's like your mom or like your sister or like your cousin. And how many hours do they have to spend on the phone to get their passport again? And the really big kicker about that is that a really sad statistic is that something like 8 to 9% of people who've been the subject of identity theft have contemplated suicide. Now, I know that's a bit of a downer, but it shows you the kind of stakes that are involved, because identity theft might not mean a lot to people who are sophisticated and have easy access to a phone or whatever. But if you've lost your phone and you don't have a lot of money, or you need to actually, find yourself rental accommodation and so forth, and your credit is suddenly impaired because of a data breach that was not your fault, and then, you can't look after your family, those are really severe consequences. And to my mind, it's not about numbers. It's about actually telling a story with the numbers, and just say that one person, and pick a person, like this is a person who could be influenced or could be impacted. And think about, even if it's like, if it's 7 million records, it's 7 million individual people with individual stories, each of whom, it could be that person who is over the edge because of that data breach. And I think that sort of a story, and the need to tell a real story about people, not numbers, that actually will stand you in great stead. I mean, you got to know the data, got to know the law, you got to know the rules, but at the end of the day, to convince someone to buy into your program, you have to make it real for them. Just like Richard's beginning, like I was subject to the da-da-da, and guess what I did? Oh, me too. Oh, me too. People do that. They get it.
Okay. No, that's a very good tip. Yeah, very good point on that, because it's a hard thing to sell, data privacy compliances, and they get fined like 50,000 or 100,000. It's like, what are they going to bother? It's like, yeah, we'll just get fined. It doesn't matter anymore, and it's always about the money. That's good. Okay, what we might do, because we've got about 5 minutes left. If anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask, please feel free to enter it in the question box. We have got one question, but if anyone else has any other ones, so we'll just answer that. So how can I be sure that organization is being transparent about the specific data that has been compromised, especially when the data breach has been identified? Example, if I've been advised that my data has been exploited, how can I ensure that the company is telling me explicitly what particular data ID number it's really been breached? It's the same as my credit card. I don't know. It's the same kind of question.
I think the answer is you probably don't know. And one of the things that you can do, and this is, if you want to build a story about all the costs, right? What people don't realize, the fines are just the regulatory fine itself. If you have to set up a call center for, to respond to 6 million calls, that's a huge amount of money. And then to remediate credit as well, like their credit rating, huge amount. And I'd highly recommend, there's a bunch of different sources online, look up all those costs, like every single step, like forensic analysis, legal opinions, add up all those things. It's massive. Okay. So if you want to pitch that to a board or an executive, actually talk through those numbers. Now, to answer the question, the answer is I don't think you can, but you can put them on the spot. You can just write a letter and I need to know exactly what was compromised. They may actually then ask you to prove your ID, which is ironic, of course, but put them on the spot. Demand to know. And then what you can do is ask for, a credit agency to actually monitor anything on you. And then you don't bear that cost, because you can do. There are products in the market that do precisely that. And again, those are some of the expenses that a company will have to bear, right? And it also, those costs discipline companies, because they go, oh God. And again, it's like the data lifecycle. You have to follow the data every step of the way. Think through when you're doing your pitch, put real numbers down. I estimate it will cost for legal fees. I estimate the forensic costs will be boom. I estimate that we'll have to hire X number of people on call, 12 hours a day. We'll have to prep up, text for them to say out loud and stuff like that. Connect them to credit agencies. Walk through every step of the costing process to remediate. And that is a great way to sell your privacy program, frankly, because they go, oh dear God, it's not just the fines, it's like bazillions, basically.
Yeah, that's good. I'll just wait. Has anyone else got any further questions before we finish up? I'm conscious of time. So we'll just give a minute. If anyone else, please enter any questions in the box for the Zoom. Otherwise, we might finish up. So I don't think there's anything else.
Oh, there's
one. That's the one we just answered. So, okay, cool. All right. Now we might finish up then. No, thank you, David, for your insights into the privacy, and also for the people that are online, and also they'll be watching. So we'll record this session and it'll make it available to everyone who signed up. So definitely appreciate your time and to sharing us with the examples, and so make it a bit more realistic than the legal side of privacy. So I know it's a complex topic and a lot of us struggle with it. So definitely appreciate your time on this.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Cheers.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye.